Was it good for you as well?
Havana. I must get to Havana.
Well, I'll just build us another ship, will I?
I can pay you. Isn't that the sound you pirates like best? 100 escudos.
You don't have that gold on you now, do you?
Bloody fucking pirates!
Pirates are some of the most recognizable icons in pop culture.
You put me at ease, sir. To think I took you for a pirate when you first appeared.
An eye patch alone can conjure all kinds of famous imagery. I'm playing a game that's chock full of them. Pirates, that is, not eye patches. There's not as many eye patches as you would expect. Anyway, I'm fascinated with that era of history, so I set out to learn more, and I thought, well, why not share that knowledge? Now, before I go too far, I'll put a disclaimer here. I am not a historian. Will probably make a mistake or two, but this is a learning experience for all of us.
Our ways lie together.
Natural allies, then.
I do most of my research as I go, and there will probably be more of these videos, so if I do make any mistakes, hopefully I can fix them retroactively. In any event, Black Flag offers a lot of people and places to talk about, but before we get too carried away, let's go back a bit and see how everything started. After the discovery of the New World in the late 15th century, it was a race to see who could claim land and develop colonies the fastest. As a result, the whole area became an economic powerhouse. While Britain and France were focusing on the northern mainland, the Caribbean islands captured Spain's attention. Most of the Caribbean colonies were Spanish, but the 30 Years' War set the stage to change that. In 1618, Spain, as one of the few remaining Catholic European nations, was at war with several other of the Protestant nations. Throughout the war, they shifted much of their colonial resources back to the European mainland. During this time, they found themselves depending more and more on African slave labor, especially overseas.
It was a sort of rub I have learned to endure, sailing among faces of such fairness.
Because of this shift, Spain lost its monopoly on the Caribbean, and other European nations began to set up their own colonies. When the war eventually ended in 1648, Europe was devastated. Battles had been mostly fought in Germany, where 25 to 40% of the population would eventually be lost, not just to the war itself, but to the resulting famine and disease that was left in its wake. Spain, meanwhile, came out of the war crippled. Their colonies especially were badly neglected. This allowed freebooters and privateers to plunder defenseless Spanish settlements with very little interference. Well-defended English and French settlements like Barbados and Tortuga were also rapidly growing in popularity as trading hubs. And so began the Golden Age of Piracy.
Oh, God. That would be an adventure.
Now, the Golden Age is generally thought to have started after the Wars of Religion in about 1650, and split into three major parts. The first era is the buccaneering period. With the wars in Europe finished, nations could resume the development of colonies. There was lots of seaborne trade and a ton of economic improvement. So there was a lot of money to be made, or stolen as it were, and much of it traveled by ship. French buccaneers lived mostly as hunters at first, but gradually began to shift their focus to robbery once Spain started wiping them out. The term buccaneer is derived from the French word boucanier, which is one who smokes meat on a boucan, which is just one of those little wooden frames that you set up over a campfire. These French buccaneers camped on islands. They lured other ships close for trading, then turned around and seized them when the merchants still had their pants down. The English takeover of Jamaica saw many more letters of marque being offered to those buccaneers and countrymen. Now these guys were different. These were privateers, who were officially sanctioned pirates used to weaken nations without having to pay to maintain a fleet. They were commissioned into a navy of sorts with a letter of marque, and they were paid with a share of whatever loot they could capture. At the same time, the growing Port Royal gave these privateers and buccaneers yet another very profitable place to sell their booty. There was a lot of stuff going on, plenty of piracy, but things couldn't really keep going the way they were. The second major era of the Golden Age is the pirate round. The fall of Britain's Stuart period restored enmity between Britain and France, which ended their profitable collaboration in the years prior. Now, since there was so much piracy going on, much of the Spanish Main had been exhausted, and several of England's colonies were desperately cash-starved. The Caribbean's economy had slowed, and the pirates that were there still wanted more, but they had experience buccaneering, so they turned their attentions east. India's economic output was dwarfing Europe's at the time. High-value luxury goods like silk and calico made ideal pirate booty, so it didn't take them long to figure that out and make their way into the Indian Ocean. There was very little protection for merchant vessels there as well, leaving them vulnerable to attack. This era of history is lesser known, but some famous pirates still emerged from it, such as Thomas II, Henry Every, and the rather controversial William Kidd. When Charles II, the last Habsburg king of Spain, died in 1700, he had no heir to the throne. This created a large power struggle in Europe, and war inevitably erupted in 1702. France and Spain found themselves at war with the Grand Alliance, which included Britain and the Holy Roman Empire. This war was known as the War of Spanish Succession, or Queen Anne's War. The next era of the Golden Age of Piracy takes place after this war.
I'm English myself. Biding my time till the next war calls me to service.
Lucky King George, having a pisspot like you flying his flag.
When the war ended, thousands of trained sailors were relieved of duty when cross-Atlantic trade was booming. As a part of the settlement, Britain obtained the asiento. This allowed them to supply slaves to Spain's colonies, giving them access to the Spanish markets in America. The sheer volume of shipping traffic at the time could support a large number of prey to prey upon it. Throughout the 18th century, the triangular transatlantic slave trade was a very rich target for them. How it worked is basically trade ships sailed from Europe to the African coast. There, they traded manufactured goods for slaves and made for the Caribbean. Once they were there, they then traded the slaves for raw goods like sugar, tobacco, and cocoa, then returned to Europe. Now, that's not exclusively their only locations. Often, New England was used as a stop within these triangles as well, sometimes replacing either Europe or Africa in the triangle. Meanwhile, the island of Jamaica refused to allow pirates to spend their loot, shutting them out of Kingston and the ailing Port Royal entirely. As a result, pirates turned to Nassau, where a lack of any sort of governor quickly turned it into a pirate haven.
Haven't I heard that Nassau is crawling with pirates? Seems a very tawdry place.
Not tawdry, liberated.
As time went on, royal attitudes toward pirates changed, and more commissioned royal ships were patrolling the area. But the lure of piracy was a strong one, and the fact that it's still around today speaks to its legacy, even though sometimes we don't quite remember things the way they actually were. But we'll talk about that next time.